Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to this meeting of Adults and Community Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee. Before we begin, there is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of a fire alarm sounding, we will need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors over there, through reception and assemble in the car park at the front of the building and wait further instructions. I would like to welcome Glenn here today and everybody else. I'll introduce you as we come to the agenda items. Could I ask those here in the chamber to turn on the microphones when speaking and turn them off again when we've finished. Apologies please, Emily.
Thank you, Chairman. We have no apologies today.
Brilliant, thank you. Declarations of members' interest. If any member has any interest throughout the agenda, please just let us know. Go to the minutes of the 19th of October 2022 to confirm the minutes of the meeting on the 10th of October 2022 as set out on page 5 to 9 as correct. So that would be the 19th of October. Are we all happy that the minutes are true and accurate reflection? A proposer, please, Tracy. Seconded, Rob. All in favour? Any against? Any absentees? So, two absentees. Thank you.
There might have been three, actually.
Three, yeah. Thank you. Okay, I've got no current announcements to make. Glenn, have you got an announcement?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Given members' interest in acute flow, which was particularly something that got profiled at the last committee meeting, one of the things that affects acute flow, of course, is the resources available to commit to, as it were, helping people to be discharged in a timely fashion. Last Monday, a week ago on Monday, the Secretary of State announced a 500 million discharge fund. That will mean for Lincolnshire 2.8 million for the County Council and 2.1 million thereabouts for the Integrated Care Board. Both have to be spent within the financial year, and the approval route means that we will need to seek Health and Wellbeing Board sign-off on the 6th of December, so next Wednesday, before submitting on the 16th of December. There's no clarity as to when we would be told whether our plan and spend profile is going to be approved, but the expectation is that we will start to report on the benefits of that investment on the 30th of December. So for a number of colleagues, there's no Christmas break, I'm afraid. The expectation is that both the Integrated Care Board and the County Council will agree each other's allocations and what the intention is by way of spend. But I would remind members this has to be spent very quickly, and that has to be approved by Health and Wellbeing Board next Wednesday. You'll appreciate that the main effort is to help the social care providers in Lincolnshire be as resilient as possible and to maintain existing capacity and, where possible, expand it. One of the items is before you this morning, the active recovery beds, but there's more to that as well. So for members' information at this point, but we will come back to you in February with an agenda item that will describe the acute flow in Lincolnshire and what actions have been taken and how they're working. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a point of interest, carrying on from that, in the last comments that at the last meeting we discussed, and it was brought to our attention the possibility of closure of some of the wards at the hospital. Have you got any update on that for us, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the closure of 3 wards is underway.
Thank you. So Okay, well, we're going to have more debate on this going in the new year anyway, so we'll pick it up when it comes round on the agenda. Okay, thank you for that, Glenn. So we'll now move on to the day opportunities, daycare centre opportunities update. And for this, I welcome Justin Hackney and John Waters. Is he online? Is he coming?
It's just me this morning.
Right, okay,
Chair,
that's
so
fine. So, welcome.
Thank you.
So, I'll let you take it away then.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, we were hoping John could join us because I'm keen for John to have a bit of profile for the work that he's leading, but unfortunately he's double booked and doing some interviews this morning, but we will seek to make sure John's here for the next update.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we've put a few slides together to also go alongside the report. So I'll work through that. Emily, would you mind going to the... Okay.
It's a nice brochure, by the way. Nicely laid out.
Thank you. So, I mean, what we're going to give a highlight of really is we're going to talk around some of the main building blocks of the continuous improvement that we're going through. So one of the big move forwards is around the staffing structure for our day services. So we've actually consulted on a new structure that's gone through consultation, and we're looking to implement that now in the new year. Key elements of that really is making the management more robust, because it was very dependent on John as the leader of that, and that actually we needed the right structure in place to actually lead the cultural change that we wanted across our day services. That moved towards a much more innovative type of service model, and more inclusive in terms of community activities as well as the buildings. So we've actually got those two new deputy positions in place, and we are recruiting to those. The wider staffing structure, as we say, will start implementation in January. We also have been successful in getting a grant from the DWP to help with employment opportunities for people with learning disabilities. And as part of that grant, we're actually recruiting, well, we have recruited 3 new job coaches. So that will support in terms of employment opportunities for the people who attend our day opportunities. And then we are also continuing recruitment and support of apprenticeships in terms of growing the workforce as well. Okay, Emily, thank you. Another key element of this plan is around having places we can be proud of. A lot of the buildings that we had were getting quite tired, and some of them were really probably unsuitable for ongoing services. So we've incrementally been working on a programme of improvement around that. We have got a number of different developments on the go. So we have done quite a lot of work at Stamford, supported by a community payback initiative to complete some internal renovations there. We've got a big programme of renovation work going on at Lincoln Day Centre. That will start February to April time, but we'll see the washrooms and the toilets modernised, because they're very outdated now. Also to open up the gardens for more use in terms of the people who attend our centres as well. So really excited about that development. We've also managed to secure an additional building in Gainsborough, which is supporting really work in the gardens there. But it's actually helpful to have an indoor space to do potting and things as well. And then another really good development that we've had is in Market Raisin. So people may know that we used to occupy the old health clinic in Market Raisin, but the rents were very expensive there, and also the building was pretty shabby, really not nice really anymore. And this is an example of the sort of innovative work that John and the wider team have done. So in terms of that wider community engagement, they got in touch with Lindham's, who in turn had set up a community interest company to renovate the old train station in Market Raisin. And that's, they got big lottery funding, renovated the old railway station there, and now they've leased it to us for our use. But they want to retain an interest in that and see it as a community asset, and the local community want to help in terms of how the day operations are run there. So there's a cafe there, etc. People can drop in, have a coffee, piece of cake, and we've put some clips in there so you can see the sort of quality of the accommodation that's there really. So we've not only managed to secure better accommodation, we've also, the annual rent is actually about £38,000 less a year. So it's actually cost us less money, we've got a better facility. So really pleased with that, and it's a good example of how we're, you know, being innovative in terms of the way that we improve things. The other thing is we're not just dependent on our buildings though. We do, part of the programme is to much more wider community engagement and do activities in the community. So Emily, if we could just move on. And in other locations actually. So people may be aware now that our day services are supporting the operation of the quad in county offices. So it provides people with opportunities to volunteer and young people coming up through transition as well, the opportunity to learn new skills. And there's one young person come up through transition who from SEND, and he's now studying at the Lincoln College in terms of catering skills. And that was part of the stepping stone in terms of experience at the quad. So really proud of that and promote it. Please do use the quad if you're on county office's site. Emily, can we move on to the next one, please? Yeah, so other opportunities around supported volunteering that we've been doing. So Keith's Animal Rescue, you'll see the list there. And you know, it's part of John's really creative leadership around how he's managed to engage the local community and created these opportunities really. So that's part of the culture that we want to spread across the wider staffing group in terms of being able to offer those opportunities. Can we have the next one please, Emily? And the other one is the ICE conference has happened for a number of years really, but it's an event that lasts for a week. It's in the Skegness area, and it's an opportunity for people with learning disabilities and their carers to come together and just really have a good time, to have a break, get together, learn new skills, have fun. There's always music there, lots of dancing. It's just, you know, it really is a great festival week really. But the day services have obviously been supporting that and made sure it happened this time, and obviously it had a gap because of COVID. And then the other thing that we're really pleased about is there's a number of people who use our day opportunities in Horncastle and Boston. We've managed to facilitate a trip to the Lake District to do outdoor pursuits. It's just, you know, it's a great opportunity for people to have, for carers to have a break, but also for people to have an opportunity to experience things that otherwise they may not have the opportunity to do. So it just shows the range of activities that we are now supporting. Another example of, you know, community engagement and opportunities is around the community archaeology. Last slide, please. Chair, we've got a couple of videos. I don't know if you'd want us to run through those quickly, or if you're pressured for time, would prefer people to log on and have a look at that at a later point. It's entirely up to you.
Because they were in the report, have people looked at them, or do you want to look at them now, or Mike?
It would be handy to look. I tried to log on, but for whatever reason,
Okay.
I wasn't able to view.
See if you can hit play then. Just on the ICE conference, is that a Lincolnshire focus, or is it actually wider afield? What's I stand for?
I don't know what I stands for, actually, Chair. It's a good question, but I can follow up and let you know. Generally, there are Lincolnshire people, but there are people from a wider field come to it as well. So certainly the events I've attended before, the people from Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire as well.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, a good Lincoln contingent as well.
And do they actually talk about, in effect, do they also talk, say, what works in their area? Is there sort of a bit of a discussions as well, rather than good practice?
It's often debates, actually, talking about particular key issues and sharing views on things. But it's really a festival of celebration, really. There's people who come with musical talents and equipment, and people get to go to play, in bands or to sing.
Yeah.
So it is it's generally a chance to meet people, celebrate and debate.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, could it be integrated or inclusive community experience? Does that sound
That's
right?
it. Yeah,
Thank
spot
you.
on.
Well done.
Google.
Yeah.
That might be where some people haven't managed to. So if I speak to Justin, and we'll sort out how people get in afterwards, and I can circulate that.
We'll circulate it round then.
Yeah, thank you. So the market raising video, as I say, that shows, it gives a guided tour of the building really, and gives you an example of the work there. And then the quad volunteering video does show people giving positive feedback about their experiences, and also from customers who've used the quad as well.
Well, I do go to Market Raising Station quite a bit, and I was there last week and I thought, oh, hold on, the green imp's lurking now on the front door. So I started to investigate, and I thought, well, it looks like it's sort of an adults thing, and hey-ho, you've just answered that question for me. So in today's agenda, but no, it's a great building, got the history in there, and actually looks really good, suited for the purpose.
Yeah, that community engagement and the fact that it's a community interest company, and it's a partnership really now. So yeah, really pleased. Great example of how that approach is working.
Yeah.
So happy to take any further questions.
Okay. Questions? Right, Marianne and then Sarah.
That does look a great initiative, and great to get an old building back into use as well, so really well done. I'm just interested in the ownership. I think it sounded like Lindham's had set up a foundation. So who actually owns the building, and who are the trustees? Does the County Council have any, too much to ask perhaps, controlling interest, but some significant interest in making sure that the building and the whole project is maintained? Thank you.
My understanding is it's a community interest company, so I don't have the full details of who all the partners are, but my understanding is we have a lease arrangement with it, but it's a long term. But I'm happy to follow up and get more details for you if that would help.
Thanks a lot. I'd just be interested. I worry a little if we had, which it doesn't sound like it, but if we had community buildings which are under the control of a private company and then get significant public grants because they are something else. So I'm sure it's fine, but it's just something that's quite good to watch. In my area, I try very hard to make sure that the building is maintained in public ownership. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Sarah.
Hi, Justin.
Hiya.
Just I'm really interested in terms of the work experience that we're providing for young adults. I think a slight risk to that is whether they then stay in those volunteering roles, or how proactively we support them to seek employment where it's suitable for them, recognising that in some cases that voluntary role may be more appropriate for them long term. So how do we track their progress, and how do we monitor? Sorry.
You'd think I'd never been here before, wouldn't you?
Your voice was doing so well.
And how do we monitor people's progression in that way? Is it possible for us to? Or is it a little bit more ad hoc in terms of whether it feels right for that particular individual?
Yeah, we don't track individuals as such. There is some national reporting as part of the adult social care outcomes framework, where we report how many people are have been employed in the last 12 months. And we've widened that as a local sort of focus really to look at the extent of volunteering as well. But we see it as an opportunity or a stepping stone for people, particularly young people coming through transitions. But we don't then track that through longer term monitoring really as such. So I don't know if that answers your question or...
Come back.
Yeah.
I have had concerns raised with me, not through any provision that we are providing, but locally, in terms of almost a sense of young people being kind of used a little bit to fill voluntary roles, very, very low paid roles, and really being taken advantage of a little bit.
Right.
And I recognise that's not our bag to deal with necessarily in terms of the provision that we give. So really it's a case of, is there more we can do to be really clear about which individuals we think could progress into paid employment, and just assurance that when we are aware of those people, we give them the correct support and advice, guidance, signposting to make sure that that happens.
Okay, so the DWP grant that we've got, that is funding sort of more supported employment opportunities. So that maybe we can come and do next time we do an update. We can provide a little bit more information on how that's working, because we are still setting it up at the minute. We just recruited the job coaches, so we'll be able to give a bit more of a flavour around that when John comes next time. Okay.
Okay. Now I've got Karen and then Tracy.
Yeah, thanks. It's a really positive report. I found it really interesting. Just a comment and a question, really. When you talked about apprenticeships in hospitality, does that include at the Sessions House, or is that just the college? Does that come into it?
So the apprenticeships I mentioned in here are more around the apprenticeships of people being employed in the day services as
right.
Carers, support workers. Right. Yeah, but then in terms of the young person from SEND, they've gone on to go to college to study a catering
so it may do then.
So it may do there as well, yeah.
I've been to the Sessions restaurant, and I know you have got to consider how much people are paid in that, but the students there, they loved what they were doing. It was really good food, and they were making cocktails and all sorts. We had a party of,
brilliant.
I think it was about 15 of us went, a women's group. It was ever so good.
Yeah.
So I'd recommend that. The second thing I wanted to ask, you talked about in Lincoln at Ancaster Day Centre, I think it's page 12, about looking at opening up the gardens. Can you keep us updated on that? I think people sometimes underestimate, or perhaps they don't now, but the value of getting out into gardens and doing stuff out there. It's part of what got me through COVID. It really is valuable. If you could keep us informed as to what's happening and when, I'd really appreciate that.
Definitely, yeah. We can have that as part of the focus of the next session, if you like, to give an example of some of the work there, some of the pictures of how it is now and how we want it to be going forward as well.
Yeah, I've got some of those in my own garden.
Okay, I think Tracy.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I kind of say the same, that the report is very interesting and really welcome and good to see. Always disappointing not to see something from South Holland in the report. Got a key champion, particularly Holbeach, but nothing in there for South Holland. So I think, like Sarah said, it would be useful for us to have kind of full details of what we have in our area. In regards to the future of the service, you've said you're going to look to do a dementia-friendly service. Just kind of wondering on timescale of bringing that in. I know there are obviously already some services already in place for that. And then on page 10, 20 of the full report, 10 of the actual brochure itself, I presume this is now printed and out in the public domain. I find the end of the second paragraph really strangely worded. I understand what you're trying to say, that the buildings can be used for all things, but to end it with the day services building varies in size, with some of the buildings being relatively large, but not all of the space or grounds are fully utilised, I see as a negative, because you're kind of putting in print, we're not using all of the space. And I find that a really strange marketing angle personally. And I know you're saying it can therefore be used for other things, but it just doesn't flow particularly well, just in my view, basically.
Okay. Yeah, no, thanks for that feedback. This isn't the version that we tend to use as promotion material. We've got a condensed version, if you like. But no, I think that's a fair point, and we ought to be more positive on that. So, and we will look to have a feature on your area next time as well. Rather than, I mean, it's going to look different at each centre, likely, but that's one of the things we're pushing on over the next 12 months. So that there'll be a flavour of that coming through as well in the next presentation.
Yeah, I mean, when you sort of go around the daycare centres, actually you do see a difference in sizes, but then Market Raising in effect needs a smaller one than the likes of Lincoln. And some of these situations, like the Lincoln one, Ancaster, it's in effect from yesterday's world that we still have, and in effect it's going to be transformed again, isn't it, with the investment. But so I've now got Mark and then Mike.
Hey, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the report. Really interesting. Pleased that the service is developing. Just a couple of questions to just reassure me around finance issues. You said that your job coaches are being funded by a DWP grant, and you're currently recruiting to them. So the first question is, what happens to the job coaches when the grant funding runs out? Who's then going to pay for them going forward? And in terms of the refurb costs, again, that was funded by a grant, which is great. But again, what happens to the maintenance of the building and keeping up to scratch again when that funding runs out? And of course, obviously working with a community interest company, I just wondered how the funding generally is going to work for that between the company and the council. Thanks.
I think it's similar. We're going to have to come back with a level of detail around the community interest company. My understanding, though, that we have a lease with them, so they'll have landlord responsibilities in terms of being able to keep that up. But I'll get further details on that and get John to circulate those afterwards. The grant would have been to the community interest company and not to the county council. It's more of a lease arrangement with them. In terms of the WP work coaches, it's a pilot initiative. But you're right, we would need to look to continue. If it's successful, and we very much hope it is, then we would have to look at new ways of funding those job coaches going forward. But they would be on short-term contracts in the first instance, so there wouldn't be exit costs for the council. But again, it's around being innovative, working in partnership, and looking for more sustainable ways to keep those initiatives going forward.
And again, especially if the intervention work you're doing here in the day centres has a cost, but by doing this, you save an even bigger cost down the line, if that makes sense. So some understanding of that, because obviously at a lot of meetings about adults and children, we talk about doing early intervention stuff as early as we can. So we identify problems really, really early. And yes, there's a cost of doing them, but we mitigate an even bigger cost further along the line. So it's best that we do the intervention work early. But just something around that I think would be useful. Yeah. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I mean, round about 40% of all of the people we support through our Learning Disability Section 75 agreement live with family and friends. So actually, you know, the day opportunities provide not just meaningful activities for people who attend the centres, but, you know, really important respite for carers as well. And actually, you know, without these support services, you know, it could well be that these family-based arrangements can't be sustained for as long as we'd like, and that we would then be more dependent on other services like residential care, etc., which, exactly like you say, are more expensive and don't promote independence as much as our day services do. So a really excellent point, thank you.
Okay. Andrew, do you want to come in?
Thank you for the report. Just a quick question really. Are the day centres full, or is there capacity to help more people? And if they are full, is there a waiting list of people wanting to use the service? Thank you.
So no, they're not full, but equally we see them as bases in the community that you can run activities there, but we see the activities in the community as well. So we're not limited just to the building space, if you like. We can do other things in the community as well. I mean, there are some physical limitations on some of the buildings, but they do vary in different sizes.
It might be helpful in a future report to have perhaps the number of people that we've been able to support in each location, so that we can get a bit of an idea as to, you know, how widespread you know, this help is that we're giving, and if there is room for more people, are we doing anything to sort of make sure the message is out to get people using it more?
Absolutely, yeah, and we are setting growth targets for the service as well in terms of more extensive use of the services. So it's part of the, you know, the deal around the investment really. So yeah, we can do that.
Thank you. If we could have the numbers, that would be very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mike?
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of points. Superb work on the fundraising sides, and we're very appreciative of that. I was glad to hear your comments about using the garden space, because obviously we all know well-being can be improved by that activity, and any feedback would be great. The point being raised about capacity, going forward, are we likely to be able to use some of the venues for warm places, i.e. inviting people in that are struggling a bit on eating their own homes? And another thought I thought you might like to progress in the future, could we get some of the performing arts students maybe from the university to come and entertain in the various suitable accommodation? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the warm spaces, we're actively encouraging people to come and utilise the day services buildings, drop in for a coffee, you know, a piece of cake. The Ancaster development as well is going to have a community cafe operated by people volunteers who come to the service as well. So definitely, yeah, that's a great idea. In terms of the performing arts, absolutely, we do have arrangements with community drama groups already who do presentations, particularly in the Louth area. And actually, we're in negotiations around use of the Guildhall in Grantham that actually has a stage there. And we're hoping to be able to, once we've secured that, working with the district council and to actually put on shows even there that might people might, you know, attend the services might be able to feature in as well. So yeah, very much that, but I like the idea of making the links with the colleges and universities as well.
Thank you. Nicola?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. Really brilliant. Love the detail. And it's very interesting to read. But the one thing that I would like to ask, and I'm happy because I'm conscious of time, if you want to come back on this on a later date or maybe email us or something, I just want you to expand further on the recognition of a business case for those with more complex needs. I think my colleague actually might have raised that earlier, but particularly around those suffering with dementia. And where do you expect the capital investment to come from? Are you able to talk about that yet, or is that still under development? Or, you know, can you expand on that a bit further, given the state of the financial status around everybody at the moment? It would be interesting to know how that's going to develop. Thank you.
Okay.
Glenn.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, a really important point given the current uncertainties around local government financing, which, by the way, we should hope to hear on the 21st of December. The budget for capital within the Directorate is a designated budget that requires no borrowing. It's a collection of different funding grants over the last 10 to 15 years that have been deliberately set aside to provide a capital investment pot against which the housing programme and day services are funded. So from a corporate point of view, there is no risk because it's existing money in the bank, and it doesn't require a borrowing element.
Okay, thank you. So, I suppose, questions, I think, I mean, actually, the fact that we've got 3 focus people on jobs from the DWP, I think is great. Focus and attention is actually ideal for those, for that work, so that's good news. Transport is obviously still being planned, and I think for the rural areas, that's quite an essential link, and so I look forward to hearing more on the transport strategy as we go forward. The dementia one is, I suppose, it's lovely that you've got it in here, and it is a great, how we progress that, I think, is the challenge, isn't it? And I suppose when I look around all the sort of work that goes on with dementia, you've got dementia cafes, you've got this and that, and in some sense I think it's got quite confusing to sort of the community in itself. What does a dementia cafe mean? How much are you looking at sort of all different models across the country to sort of figure out how to sort of bolt on the dementia aspect into our current daycare opportunities?
So John is actively sort of engaging with other key players. So Age Concern are very interested in working with us really in terms of developing what the offer may look like. I think it's going to vary according to each community. It's around really reaching out in terms of each community, making those links with you know, the local GP surgery and you know, making those referrals when you're onto the dementia registers, you know, but encouraging that development, just getting the community engagement from people really. But I think it's not necessarily setting off with a set menu. It's more about evolving it around with people around you know, what's needed in each locality. Yeah. Because there are some private services as well, so there are private day services that people can use as well. So I think, but as I say, I think it's probably best we do a bit of a feature on it next time as well, and that we can, you know, open that up to more questions at that point.
I mean, here lies the biggest challenge and problem, isn't it? It's community-based. There is private sector in certain areas, and actually when it's like Boston, I know that they have certain, they've always been quite specific on their requirements, but actually in some areas, like Boston has a blind organisation that sort of sits in the heart of its community, and very other few places have got such support group, and that's the reality, isn't it? Each area needs a certain support, and I suppose our role is not trying to always sort of try and design something, but it's more giving the community the power to sort of like, here are some buildings. If actually Market Raisin has got a real focus on something, then actually come to us and put forward ideas and let the community sort of try and, you know, work within what they prioritise in their areas, because we're all slightly different. I think the one thing that has come out is I think if we could have sort of the local details, and not just in areas, but all of us want to see perhaps what goes on in East Lindsey to South Holland, etc. So if you could just sort of give us a bit more breakdown on the numbers, the times, and the details within each area, and in effect what their needs are, then it will just give us a good backbone summary. I would suspect that we perhaps go on maybe a tour, which we've nearly got organised last time before COVID shut it all down, but I would say that perhaps wants to be done maybe in 9 months' time, potentially, because after the summer, because I think it gives time for Ancaster and Grantham and things to sort of progress to the next level.
Yeah.
I'm open to suggestions on that. And I would say the dementia approach, actually, it'd be nice to sort of get an update on that maybe in 3 months' time. I mean, it's sort of an area that it's a challenge in itself how we best capitalise on it, but I think it's one that really in the community wants some support in this, because I know if you're living with somebody with dementia, it becomes very hard. Well, it can become very hard work, and the one thing they need is respite. The carers do. Glenn, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the second point, if I may, and I'll defer to Justin on the first one. In terms of dementia, there is a joint strategy that we have with our health partners, along with a number of others. Happy to bring that forward, and it would be Afsane Sabori, one of Justin's colleagues, who would probably present that for you.
Yeah, so in terms, were you wanting to know about the transport, Chair, or was that the other point? Or?
Yeah, I mean, what have you got? It's sort of enabling people to access the day services, isn't it?
Yeah, so I did meet with the Executive Director, Responsibility for Transport in the Council the other day, and also Nicole Hilton, the AD with Responsibility, and we are going to do some joint work around looking at the transport offer for our day ops together, starting very shortly as well. So I want to explore the opportunities for more flexibility in terms of the transport, being less reliant maybe on taxis, and may explore the opportunity maybe having their own minibuses so they can help to take people out to do activities in the community. Like, you know, we've done tree planting in the past, but even going bowling at the local, you know, Tenpin bowling place, etc. Yeah, so we're going to do some joint work around that, see the art of the possible.
Yeah, no, that'd be a good idea. I mean, it's there are various options. I've always been quite a fan of certain care day centres actually have their own minibuses and connect and pick people up, and like in Lincoln area you could sort of go around, but it is a complicated thing because you don't just rock round and pick somebody up and within a minute you're on your way. It can be a lot longer process of sort of getting people to and from homes to day centres.
The other key thing we want to do is explore the opening hours of the centre. So actually by changing the opening hours, it might make it easier for people to be able to drop people off in the morning or pick them up at night. So, you know, that one of the reasons why we need to look at the restructuring as well, to make sure that we can be able to facilitate some of the flexibility in opening hours.
Okay, so if we can get sort of an update on the details, figures, numbers locally, and then I think the best thing is to perhaps have this sort of an update back sort of towards sort of perhaps summertime, spring, summer, and then with a view that we perhaps do a planned tour sort of September, October, if everything's all in a line and that sort of suits our redevelopment agenda. But I'll let you look at your schedulings.
Well, we've got we're developing a plan of visits anyway. So Councillor Wendy Bowkett and Councillor Elizabeth Sneath are already visiting the centres with us.
Yeah.
But equally, if any members want to visit the local patch, the centres there, we can facilitate that at any time. But yeah, if you want to organise a wider sort of grand tour next year, happy to facilitate that.
Yep. So we're all happy with that we get the local information sort of as soon as you can, please. And then, yeah, we can all go and have a look. But I think we'll sort of have an update of how things are progressing and the sort of, as you say, the dementia bit as well, coming forward next year.
Thank you very much for your ongoing support.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. So we'll now go on to item 6, the Lincolnshire Better Care Fund.
Thank you, Chair. And the away team for this one includes Pam Clipson and Nikita Lord, who are both very close to the Better Care Fund. So we'll probably share the slides between us, if that's okay. And I'll cover the first few with a bit of a potted history. And whilst Emily's bringing the slides up on screen, I'll begin with that, if I may, Chair.
Okay.
So members will, the Better Care Fund can go back to 2015, so some members may not remember too much about it, but I do. And I was in my role negotiating the first minimum contribution from what was then the 4 clinical commissioning groups when the Better Care Fund first came in, although it wasn't called that at the time. At that point, the Better Care Fund minimum contribution to the council was £20 million. And to a degree, there was a level of negotiation in there. Subsequent years became prescribed, so the minimum contribution was set nationally. And at the time, clinical commissioning groups were obliged to meet that set national contribution. It's now in excess of 60 million. So it has grown substantially. And from a government perspective, over the years, ministers have been increasingly pleased to see that the minimum allocation for an integrated pool of money has been exceeded by additional contributions that NHS colleagues or indeed the County Council have made. In Lincolnshire, the value of that Better Care Fund is £279 million. So it has grown exponentially over the years and now forms a singularly important pillar in our ability to deliver services and live within our means, which was, in fact, one of the initial national objectives. I think it's...
It's throwing my settings out, so I'm just going to...
Beware of the technology. As the years have progressed, government expectations around the Better Care Fund have evolved, and we will give a little more detail of what that means. But in essence, it started... No, shall I keep on, Emily?
Yeah, I'll be a second, sorry.
It started with a number of national conditions, of which there were 4. The national conditions have been socialised across the council and with our NHS colleagues, and is indeed the subject of a presentation to Health and Wellbeing Board next Wednesday. Could you go to the 3rd slide, please, Emily? There we go. So those 4 national conditions ostensibly are about protecting adult social care, and this was because at the time the then government had introduced a period of austerity following the subprime crisis, which began in 2008 but played out in the public sector in 2010. The consequence of that was that adult social care across the country were obliged to make savings, substantial savings. The Better Care Fund was a vehicle for transferring some of the money that the NHS had to support and sustain social care, particularly when it came to facilitating discharge from acute trusts. Lincolnshire was no different from anywhere else on that footing. In addition, the performance regime which followed was also increasingly made more comprehensive. It has always had, though, facilitating hospital discharge in the form of out-of-hospital services that would allow people to get home in a timely fashion and safely. So a long history, a lot of complications added in as the government became more and more ambitious for it. And I think it's fair to say that in the last 3 years, the Better Care Fund, 4 years actually, the Better Care Fund has been rolled forward because the government has not paid it much attention for obvious reasons. I think for the future, and we'll come to that later, my expectation is that we should expect the Better Care Fund to gain additional profile once the new government and the new Secretary of State has had the time to reflect on its original purpose and where it's got to in the intervening 8 years. And I'll hand over to Pam now to cover off some of the financial elements.
Thank you, Glenn. Morning, everybody. So the next couple of slides basically break down how the funding flows into Lincolnshire. The minimum ICB contribution, which is in front of you, is paid directly into the ICB. But one of the conditions is that the NHS contribution to adult social care be maintained. So in your slide pack on pages 45 and 46, you'll see the minimum ICB of 61 million split into those areas that are to protect local authority adult care services and those areas that are to promote and enhance joint working. There will be some services in both. This is for the BCF reporting purposes, but operationally, we manage each service as one. So you heard Justin a minute ago talk about the Section 75 for learning disabilities. We will bring the services together, and one of the slides later on picks up on that. So in addition, as Glenn mentioned, we've got several funding streams. The minimum ICB contribution goes directly to the ICB. The Better Care Fund is a really good mechanism, a really good vehicle for integration and to bring the funding together across Lincolnshire. So as a local authority, LCC contributes into that pool funding, the 91 million that you see in front of you there. And again, that is so that we haven't got that disjointed approach of, well, there's 7 million here for using LD as an example, and there's 50 million over there, and there's 30 million that comes in a different way. We bring it all together under one Section 75 with a team to manage it under, in that case, Justin, and that we come together as health and social care colleagues every month to manage that service. The Better Care Fund is that crucial vehicle that enables the funding to flow across the person's journey and enable that service to run as efficiently as we can across Lincolnshire, regardless of health and social care. Because for the person, they go across both in these particular services. And you can see there another really good example is the Integrated Community Equipment Service. The committee received quite a detailed insight earlier this year as we procured that service. Again, that is for health and social care. If you're discharged from hospital, it doesn't matter which badge you have, health or social care, you need that piece of equipment. So we come together under the Better Care Fund, under one agreement, to enable us to deliver one service for the needs of the individual. And again, meet the Better Care Fund conditions, which is aligned to that prompt discharge from hospital, regardless of whether you're a health or social care individual. Sorry, I'm full of cold, so just going to have to breathe. Next slide, please. Apologies. Next slide, yes, sorry. I think this one's Glenn. This one's going to pass to you.
Thank you. The original concept for the Better Care Fund did not include disabled facilities grants, which is funding directly paid to district councils to support people who live at home who need significant changes being made to their property in the form of a disabled facilities grant. All the districts receive that funding, and of course, because Lincolnshire is a two-tier area, it's distributed as you see on that slide. Over the years, it has become clear that some districts do not use their full allocation and others exceed the government allocation. and districts are allowed to make up the gap with voluntary contributions to their own disabled facility grant pool, but not all can afford to. In a district financing context, these sums are significant. So when the government decided to place disabled facilities grants inside the Better Care Fund, it generated some debate across Lincolnshire, as you might expect, and we were fortunate here because we had previously agreed the Housing, Health and Care Delivery Group, which sits below the Health and Wellbeing Board. So the districts were already working together and working with the County Council as a result of that forum. That made a huge difference in how this landed here in Lincolnshire. In the intervening period, and every year, by the way, this disabled facility grant has grown. So it increases, or it has increased up till recently. We're not yet sure what the government intends for next year with respect to this. What has happened is that the districts are increasingly now working collectively across Lincolnshire to reduce the overheads of having 7 different approaches to managing DFGs. So it's much more cost effective, and of course we can stretch the available funding as a result. The other thing though is that as a result of it being incorporated into the Better Care Fund, housing subtly is increasingly a feature within the BCF and increasingly a feature to our NHS colleagues. That's terribly important when you think about the number of people who are in inpatient facilities with a learning disability or a mental health condition that the NHS is desperately trying to find a community option for. You need housing. And one of my colleagues has been quoted as saying, every social care decision is a housing decision. So this actually touched on that. The other thing that we can do within the BCF is to pool this money, and if there is any unspent, to reallocate it for agreed purposes that the 7 districts, the County Council, the NHS and the Health and Wellbeing Board all agree. Now, you'll appreciate that that requires a level of negotiation and, pun intended, accommodation between the partners. In Lincolnshire, we've gone quite some distance in improving the use of the DFGs and making inroads in things like home energy schemes, where we've used unspent DFG allocations to target people whose energy at home was in some jeopardy. And that was well before the current economic circumstances that we face. So it has been a significant adjunct. It brought the districts onto the table as key negotiators and key stakeholders along with our NHS partners. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair, and I'll pass back to Pam.
Thank you, Glenn. So the 279 million Better Care Fund has one pooled budget manager, which sits with Adult Care Finance, sits with myself. So whilst all the funding doesn't come into LCC, the actual accounting, etc. does. From LCC's perspective, 90 million of that 279 is within Lincolnshire's services, both adults and children. So you'll see there are some CAMS funding in here, which is the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. So it is wider to a degree than just adult social care. The IBCF is the element that is paid directly into LCC, with the condition attached to that grant that it must be pooled into the Better Care Fund. So even though we have the funding going into different bank accounts, the condition of that grant is that it all must be pooled together. This grant, this part of the grant can be used to meet adult social care needs, reduce the pressures on the NHS and ensure that the local service social care provider market is supported in particular. And you'll see on here that the largest costs supported relate to the increase in both the demand for adult social care as well as the unit cost, which in turn are the rates that we pay to the adult social care that comes through adult scrutiny around January, February of each year currently. And that's where our largest value lies. We don't yet know whether this will be uplifted for next year or not. Next slide, please. Oh, hang on. Yep, that one. So this slide is just, instead of being able to see the Better Care Fund on the funding flows that come in, this splits the 279 million into how we manage it operationally. So each of the services, for example, you've got learning disabilities is 87.8 million, mental health services, the largest one of all at 90.4. So that's how the overall Better Care Fund is split across the services across Lincolnshire. And I think that's it from me, so I'm going to hand over now to Nikita. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Good morning. So I'm just going to touch on some of the conditions we have to meet in terms of reporting. So we do have key lines of inquiry that we have to provide assurance against. So 8 overall. I'll just expand it in a little bit more detail. So one of the main conditions is that we do have to have a jointly agreed plan and narrative, and also data and metrics as well. So the jointly agreed plan for Lincolnshire was submitted on the 26th of September, and we are expecting imminently the sort of formal approval on that as well. So that should be due this week. So that is approved by the Health and Wellbeing Board. Timing usually isn't fantastic, but we've been approved anyway. And that is about having sort of the local partners, providers, representatives, as long as, of course, the local authority and the ICB as well. The second, Chloe, there is a clear narrative for the integration of health and social care. So alongside the main BCF plan, we have to submit a narrative plan as well, which goes into a little bit more detail about how we are delivering that integrated approach. So how we will implement that, collaborative commissioning, and sort of contributing to reducing health inequalities as well. The next one, so the demonstration of how, the DFG, I think Glenn's covered there. So the next one, the demonstration of how the area will maintain the level of spending. That is around sort of, as Pam's touched, the minimum contributions and sort of ring fencing some of those. The next one we've got is around, they're a bit different on my plan, sorry, they're a bit more detailed on my plan. So another one we have to do is around the BCF policy objectives, which Glenn has touched on, and how we are meeting those, so how the funding sources are meeting those, and we also have to submit the metrics against that as well, which I will go into in a little bit more detail in a minute. We also have to give expenditure detail on that plan as well. So Pam provides a lot of the detail, and that is sort of a line by line against what the BCF have as different schemes. So effectively saying sort of which part of the pool that money has come from. We also have to touch on health inequalities. That is a specific key line of inquiry against the BCF, and how we're working towards those as well. Next slide, please. So the performance data for the BCF, we have BCF metrics which are listed there. It is a mandatory submission. We have to submit these metrics, and a lot of those will come from NHS colleagues as they hold the data and information. So avoidable admissions is the indirectly standardised rate of admissions per 100,000 of the population. Discharge to usual place of residence. Residential admissions is long-term supports needs of age 65 and over, and then the reablement as well. So the reablement is still at home 91 days after discharge from hospital. A new element of the BCF submission this year was around capacity and demand for intermediate care. That was split into hospital and community, as well as providing a spend figure on intermediate care as well. So that was specifically looking at the discharge pathways, so demand per pathway and capacity per pathway as well. And there are some metrics.
Just on that last slide, when we talk about avoidable admissions, and I suppose you could say demand as well. I mean, if you look at demand over the last 10 years, how much variation is there? And if we then stripped it more to adults and our part and our sort of bit, is when we're looking at avoidable admissions, first off, how much, what figures are we looking at in terms of just in adults, not NHS material, what we can focus on, making sure that we're sort of, in effect, doing the maximum that we can to sort of hit those performance datas, and looking at the sort of demand and capacity, which we always do look at, but really over a 10-year period, we should be able to sort of set ourselves up perhaps better. Or is it actually swinging now all over the place?
Thank you, Chair, if I take that one. So over the years, the picture of A&E pressures has shifted. It was particularly impacted by COVID. The fact that our NHS colleagues nationally have a 7.1 million backlog on procedures and rising, compared to pre-COVID, which was below 2 million. So the normal run rate was somewhere between 1.5 and 1.8 million people across the country. It's now 4 times that, and it's growing. And the winter will present real challenges for our NHS colleagues, as it does for us, in not only managing demand, but also addressing a backlog, which is growing. Part of the reason for that, of course, is that there is increased acuity as a result of people waiting for procedures. And we also know that the population that we serve is increasingly one where long-term conditions are prevalent, more so than they were 15, 20 years ago. Most people today over 75 will have 5 long-term conditions, whereas 15, 20 years ago it was only 3. And those conditions interact with each other, which makes it terribly hard to manage within an A&E environment. The model for A&E has shifted with increasing use of GP screening, and a lot of hospital investment is at the front door now, which, as it were, has a pre-admission facility. There was research about 2015, 2016 that indicated 40% of people coming to A&E did not need to be admitted, but were. That figure probably is lower now, though I'm not familiar with any recent research, as a result of the increased acuity. It's very difficult to split adults from health on front door admissions, but what is clear is that the business model is shifting to active recovery pre-admission. So a lot of investment is going into the services that would be outreach and rapid response, so that people who are at risk of admission can be supported at home, hopefully in a way that would prevent them being admitted. Virtual wards are one business model. There's a number of others that require both health and social care operating together in the community. Of course, the major challenge there is that the vast majority of all the increases in the NHS over the last 10 years have gone to acute care, not community. So our primary and community health services, shall we say, have not benefited to the same degree that acute investment has. And of course, many of the pressures that our hospitals are facing, based upon the CQC annual report that has been published recently, would suggest that some 11% of all admissions are the result of what's not available in the community as a result of primary and community pressures.
So just on that then, when we talk about the backlog, the cases, for argument's sake, if somebody needed a hip replacement, which is a NHS treatment, but actually it's adults that will have to look after that person if they can't move around very well and they need support, I suppose is where we then come into this equation. But if we look at that, is there a way in which we have, and I think you've perhaps done it through the active recovery, a backup plan of how we can actually relieve pressure in the system for those, you know, if at the end of the day you're not going to have your hip done for 3-4 years, how can we support you through that? Or is there a targeted approach to sort of accepting that we have this backlog and therefore how do we do it? And is that in effect your active recovery?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of addressing the wider backlog, that was something that the government had allocated 5.6 billion for over 3 years. With the changes in government that took place in the last few months, successive changes in government, that money was withdrawn as a result of the changes to the uplift in the national insurance contributions. Having said that, though, the Chancellor has agreed additional funding for our NHS colleagues nationally, which should help, according to the NHS Chief Executive, address the backlog. But it won't happen quickly, I suspect. The wider winter plan, which you've touched on, is something that's going to the Health and Wellbeing Board and the Integrated Care Partnership next Wednesday that includes a fairly thorough winter plan which details at some level the different actions that are being taken, of which the active recovery beds are just one. And Tracy is here and is heavily engaged in that.
Okay, excellent. Colin, did you want to come in?
Yes, sorry, Glenn, it's just the arithmetician in me. On the GBF fund, you showed the district councils get allocations. I don't know if we can look at that slide. But Boston got over 2 million and the others didn't. In fact, Boston got more than double, nearly treble, Lincoln, from what I can see, which means that the Triple Alliance of Boston, East Lindsey and South Holland, as you say, making savings, is getting more than half of the money that's coming into Lincoln. I don't know if you could talk that through, because I'm amazed that Boston should be more than double on a fixed set of criteria that covers the whole county. It hasn't got the population of Lincoln. How can it be getting 3 times the money Lincoln gets?
Glenn?
Thank you, Chair. There is a national formula for allocations, and it isn't just about population size. It's also about the nature of that population and deprivation levels. This, of course, is the supply side. What this doesn't, so i.e. what money is becoming available, it doesn't tell you what the demand looks like across the districts, and demand is very different, but consistent over the years within districts. So the districts that are high demand are consistently high demand, and vice versa for the low demand. One of the benefits of pooling this within the Better Care Fund, subject to districts agreeing, is that they can use that money for better effect and spread the benefits of underspends in one area where there's more pressure in another. That has been a challenge over the years to secure, but we've reached a point of general consensus where the districts are increasingly doing that.
That's a really good explanation of where we are. What I'm truly interested is, how have Boston qualified for that criteria to get 3 times the amount that Lincoln does? And I know you said there's a whole range of criteria, and maybe you want to answer me after the event. It just is a staggering difference, that's all. And it might have been historic, because it might be that things are happening year by year by year, but I'm amazed that there isn't, you know, well,
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to provide the funding formula, but of course it comes from the Department for Levelling Up Communities and Housing, not from DHSC.
Okay. All right. I think we'll just let's finish off the slide or slides.
Thank you, Chairman. So just in terms of some of the metrics on capacity and demand, so Glenn has touched on some of the elements that we have to put in there alongside providing the data. We also do have to provide sort of a local plan for ambition as well, which Glenn has mentioned some of the schemes that we have in place to support those metrics as well. If anyone would like any sort of deep down data into sort of the metrics, then please do let me know once you've had a chance to review them. And then I think it is over to Glenn for sort of the next steps and on the horizon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. By way of a quick summary, members will recall that this is one of the largest pooled amounts in the country. And it's not just because we can say it's the largest pooled sum. It makes a material difference to people's lives. It means that we're not arguing over who pays what. For most of the people that benefit from this are people with health and care needs. It isn't easy to delineate. It also means that we increasingly work as a single service across health and care, so people get a level of join between us that elsewhere in the country they won't see. And there will be delays elsewhere because other councils and other NHS partners are arguing over who pays for what. We're trying to avoid that here, and that's one of the singular reasons why it's so important to do. It also means that we can make best use of the Lincolnshire pound. So, one of the biggest in the country. I'm expecting that next year to be over 300 million. Because we are continuing to build other areas of service by bringing them closer together. It's a lot easier now that there is one integrated care board and not 4 CCGs. The plan for the BCF, Nikita kind of touched on this a little bit, but she was being terribly diplomatic. The plan for the Better Care Fund spend relates to 22-23, this financial year, and has not yet been signed off by the government. No Systems Better Care Fund plan has. Which tells you that the timing of government decisions against spend in year is just significantly out of sync. I know that there is a desire nationally to address that, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. The other thing to bear in mind is that we report quarterly to the Health and Wellbeing Board on performance metrics, and they're probably easier to digest than the ones you've just seen there. Graphs tend to be a bit more digestible than a lot of numbers on the spreadsheet. In the 3 years since COVID, that data reporting did not happen largely as a result of government focusing on other things. It will be coming back again this coming year, and we will be reporting more regularly on the key metrics, some of which will come from government, and we can expect more because during COVID, ministers became very aware that they didn't really know what was going on in social care as much as they did in the NHS. Councils knew, but ministers didn't. The consequence of that is that national reporting is going to become much more high profile for social care than it ever was. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent, thank you very much. I've got Sarah and then anybody else?
Thanks, Hugo. Glenn, it seems like forever ago that we first started talking about these things, and it does feel like it's been forever thus in some ways. And I think what I'm seeing is that we've made strides to shift in terms of what we were talking about years and years ago in terms of genuine integration of NHS and social care. And I think that's welcome. But at the same time, we've seen that we've seen additional pressures on the system, which means that the benefit of that integration, I don't feel are yet being felt by people in the communities, because yes, we're becoming integrated, but at a time when acute care is up against the wall, when we've got a massive crisis in social care recruitment, where our care providers can't recruit, can't get staff. And so, although I see the benefits in terms of policy, my overall observation is I'm not sure that our residents on the ground and in our communities are actually seeing that. And I think that's a real great shame when I see all of the work that's been put into getting the strategy, the policy, the direction of travel correct. So kind of my question is, what do we, even if it's stuff that we need to do in Lincolnshire, and kind of like forget the rest of the world almost, what is it, if you were to magic wand to wave or several, what would it be, or what would they be? Because as I say, policy's going the right way, but I'm not sure our residents are quite seeing that yet, if ever.
Glenn, are you coming back on that?
Okay, that's a long answer, Chair, but I will try and keep it succinct. Last month, a book was published called A Way Forward for Social Care. It was written by a colleague who I have a lot of respect for. It's possibly the best history lesson I've read in the last 20 years on why we are where we are. But it takes a bit longer to read than I've got time here. The simple summary is that for 20 years plus, successive governments have tried to fix social care. They have not, because they took too long to come to a view about what that looked like and focused on the wrong question. So, for example, if we take two particular periods in time where governments said that they were going to reform social care. One was going to create a national care service in the early 2000s and ran out of road and came up to an economic crisis, the subprime, and also lost their place in Parliament. That happened again in 2017, where, as it were, the intention was to fix social care. So there are quite a few history lessons where governments of the day have taken too long to come to a view about what it looked like, the fix, did not invest where they could have invested. So the deal not funding reforms in 2014 was an opportune moment. That would have cost £6 billion, but didn't happen because the government then became very vulnerable and lost power. A new government comes in and takes a slightly different approach. But successive governments haven't addressed this. So my magic wand would be cross-party consensus, a long-term funding settlement, and answering the right questions, none of which have applied in the last 20 years, but I remain hopeful.
My reply to that would be, isn't it at times, i.e., should we in Lincolnshire not look at actually where we feel we should go right across the health and you know, NHS and ourselves, and actually formulate a game plan around actually what you've just said, with the view that actually how do you therefore then work within your current framework to actually try and deliver to where you want to be?
Thank you, Chair. You could say that the Health and Care Act provides the opportune moment for local systems to determine their best futures, because we're not all the same. And the answers don't tend to come readily from London when they're best determined locally. Councils have a stronger sense of place and what communities need. Having said that, the new Secretary of State, the new Chancellor, has given a few reassuring notes, sometimes in private, about the what they see as an important point around delegation. What hasn't happened in the past was government prepared to delegate powers to local systems to come up with their own solutions, particularly within the NHS. The integrated care partnership, the integrated care system structures provide a governance arrangement which at least is part of the solution for that.
Good, well, thank you. I think it's just got to keep trying to work it through. Marianne, and then Tracy.
Thanks very much, and that was very helpful as well. The thing I'm looking at is if we put more than other councils do into this Better Care Fund, what are the advantages? I think what you're saying is that you're finding that the management, if you like, of that fund through the structures we've got gives the right flexibility to be able to give a joined-up service. And I'm quite surprised you didn't already have the disabled facilities in that way. So is there room for more, or where is the balance? Have we got the balance just right? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the integration isn't a universal panacea for everything, but where there's a good business case, it makes a material difference to stretching the Lincolnshire pound as far as it can go. So if we think about the community equipment service, that makes a material difference to our ability to deliver more equipment for the money we get. It also spreads risk. So we agree risk as part of the pooling. Risk of pressure on one partner that then translates to pressure on another. So we avoid that by pooling. And as I mentioned earlier, individuals materially benefit from this. If you think about the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, rated outstanding by Ofsted, one of the keys for that is the level of integration and pooling, which means that organisations are working for one purpose, not against each other. In terms of where could we go beyond this, I think the government is reviewing the Better Care Fund now. I think it will take time to do that because it's a new government. And my expectation is that ministers will see it as a further opportunity to pursue integration. From a ministerial perspective, the BCF is seen as a key lever for delivering that. And a number of us have, over the years, been reminding ministers that housing is a singularly important element in meeting better people's health and social care needs. Some of those ministers have listened to that. But again, it sits across two government departments.
Okay, thank you. Marianne?
Supplementary, if I might. Thank you. We used to have continuing care was one where people fell through the gaps and they got tossed from one to the other. So presumably this has resolved that. The other question is about, you mentioned the DILNOT cap, and of course there is discussion of whether that cap that was proposed previously and then dropped should come back. It was at an £85,000, I think, per year. That would be, I guess. I think. No, total it was, wasn't it? Total. That people they don't have to spend more than that on their social care, no matter how wealthy they are. And my concern was about if we can't afford or can barely afford to support residents who are needing care in the current situation, if we added the burden of also having to subsidise very wealthy people, we might find ourselves unable to meet that target. Thank you.
Glenn?
Oh, where to start? So, an observation, if I might, Chair, because I don't think there's a singular answer that would satisfy all of the question. So the DILNOT funding reforms would have cost the government £6 billion, and the new government, when it came in, delayed that for 2 years. History seems to be repeating itself with the fare rates, and the government saying that it will defer decisions on that until 2025. The cynics might say that the fare rates won't happen, and floors and ceilings to the amount people will have to pay. Capital thresholds may be tweaked, but will not be reformed substantially until after the next election. Okay, and there's not a lot we can do about long grass at this point, where it's on hold and that's that, and we'll not worry ourselves about that until it comes back or not. Tracy.
Thank you, Chairman. Fully support it. Would love to see it grow more and more, to be honest. And I think residents are feeling the benefit without even knowing that it's happening in the background kind of thing. Just a couple of tiny ones on page 49. Just trying to understand the changing in a couple of amounts. So you've got adult safeguarding, domestic abuse and supported housing was receiving funds and is now zero in 22-23. And also the co-responders as well. I presume they're going to be funded the same, but outside of the Better Care Fund, but just want to confirm. Thank you.
Yeah, I can pick that one up. So we've got funding from other grants. So we always, as Adult Care and wider to LCC, maximise all the grants we get. In 2022-3, we got quite a significant, through the new domestic abuse bill, community safety came in under that, so that service is now funded from a different grant rather than the Better Care Fund, but it is still done in partnership with colleagues and organisations across Lincolnshire, as is co-responders.
Okay, so that report was for noting. Karen, have you got some?
I just wanted to say, Glenn, that I completely agree with you about the cross-party consensus. I think it's the only way we'll ever come up with something that's fair to everybody and is actually sustainable, because by nature governments change and there's got to be cross-party consensus for that to have that sustainability. And I would just make the point, this isn't aimed at you, but we have had the same party in government since 2010. I'm sure there are people who are in Westminster who'd like to disassociate themselves from some of what's happened in the past few years, but we've had the same party in government. Personally, I think if we'd have had a cross-party consensus with regard to the approach and things that we did during COVID, we'd have seen better outcomes and fewer deaths and money better spent, but that's a whole different thing, isn't it? The second thing, and you might not know the answer, you talked about the disparity in the level of funding around the disabilities facility grant, and Boston get 3 times as much as Lincoln, and obviously I represent somewhere in Lincoln. How do the Lincoln District Council feel about that? Does it go without saying, or does it cause friction, or is it something that's accepted and it works in practice? Thank you.
Glenn.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a number of colleagues who are sitting in unitary councils where this debate is should be theoretically easier because it's one council and all the money comes in, whether it's a disabled facilities grant or an adult social care precept. That isn't the case here. So a level of networking is necessary. I've been helped over the years by members who are twin hatters in getting political consensus to work collaboratively across the county area. That hasn't always been easy, but I think the benefits have been able to assuage colleagues that they were losing something for their area and giving something to somebody else who felt that they were under more pressure. What we're trying to secure isn't win-lose, but everybody gains something from this by working more collectively around reducing overheads, around the DFGs, because we used to have 7 design teams. We had 7 lists of approved contractors. And that meant a lot of work for contractors as well, who were bidding for building works. We've now got 1 list that goes across the county. So that, again, is an efficiency. When we underspend, the 7 districts and ourselves work together to identify what we think is a high priority for spending. So we're eating into this agenda, which started with everybody's doing their own thing, to finding common purpose. But it's not always easy, and sometimes we get knockbacks.
Okay. Well, I think there is a lot of debate for the future, but there's one thing for sure, the Better Care Fund actually now has a lot of money in it. It works relatively well, and in effect, you could say really it's the area that reform should come from, actually. Devolution and bring it locally, because like you say, actually we've got more your skill base and practicalities of how everything works here rather than central London that looks at it with a slightly different set of eyes to what we look at it at. But be interesting to see what happens next year towards it. But that report was for noting and always stimulates a good debate. I think sometimes perhaps out of our arena a little bit we drift, but always an interesting debate with Better Care Fund. Okay, well thank you all for that one, and thank you Nikita and Pam for your contributions on that. We'll move on to item 7, the procurement of active recovery beds. For this we've got Tracy Perriott, Head of Hospital Services, and Fergus Gilmore, Commercial and Procurement Manager, Commercial Team. So welcome both of you. Who's taking it away, starting off?
Good morning.
Morning.
We're here to talk this morning with regards to a proposal for some active recovery beds. And we'd like you to consider the report on our behalf, please. So, as a summary, the active recovery beds are a facility for a pathway for people to be discharged from hospital on pathway 1, which the plan is that they're going to their own home and need a period of reablement or additional recovery support. But the level of support they need is perhaps more intense or higher on the initial discharge from hospital. So the active recovery beds, the plan is that they will provide a reabling focus to the people of Lincolnshire so that they can go into a bedded facility in a wing or floor with other service users, customers that are also going through a reablement process, with a plan that they will receive enhanced support from the care home provider, but also from adult care staff to enable them to return home with a lesser package of care than what they would have done if they'd gone home or been able to go home immediately from hospital. So the reablement focus, obviously our reablement service that we have in the community is fantastic, and we reable a very high percentage of people to no services at all. We want to be able to mirror this in a bedded setting for those people that have a higher level of need on immediate discharge from hospital. I think sometimes people from hospital, they might be medically optimised, which is the term that health use now, but they might still need an extended period of recovery from their hospital experience. So the idea is that the active recovery beds will provide that, but also provide a reabling focus. So if the service user customer needs to go home from hospital and needs to go to the toilet at night independently, they will be supported in the care home to do that. So the culture of the care staff will be to do with people and not do for. So to enable that person to become more independent to return home. The proposal is that there will be 60 beds across the county. There'll be 20 in the south, 20 in the west and 20 in the east of the county. As I said before, they'll be on the same floor or in a bespoke unit. The beds are being funded from winter monies from the ICB, which I think is a big step forward for us by looking at the bigger picture of intermediate care focus. So the critical thing about these beds is that they're going to be care-led reablement beds, so it will be led by care staff and not therapy staff. So it is different from the transitional care bed offer that the Lincolnshire Community Health Services provide, so it will be care-led rather than therapy-led, but we will have the support of Lincolnshire County Council's occupational therapy teams and social work teams in that as well. And it will enable us to work closer with providers, home care providers, our prime providers and reablement service to continue with someone's reablement journey on the discharge from one of the active recovery beds. So should I hand over
you want to continue?
If you're comfortable, yes. So the report continues with that. Sorry, yes, that's probably a little bit too loud, actually. Is this better? Can you hear me all right? Is that fine? Okay, thank you. First time using this, I have to say. So the report goes on to set out the budgetary position. Tracy's touched on the fact that the costs are coming from the health rather than from the county council's side of budgeting, and our colleagues in finance have calculated the weekly payment at the sum of £893.40 for the duration of this contract. Now, this is a short-term contract at the moment. It's only funded to the end of the current financial year, 31st of March 2023, and the contract is going to be created in that manner as a short-term contract. We don't know at the moment, as we've heard earlier in this meeting, what the funding settlements will be for the future, but at the moment we're not suggesting that it's going to be something that will be continued unless there is future funding, and the way the contracts are going to be created is on a short-term basis. Now, you'll also see from this report that due to the strong desire for this to be effective during the winter period and the national pressures that the wider health service is facing, particularly with regard to hospital admissions and discharges, and the fact that that's a priority for residents as well as for central government, means that we've been very keen across the authority and the health service to get this up and running as quickly as possible, and therefore a report was taken previously by colleagues of mine to the leader and the executive councillor initially, just to alert them to the nature of this and to the fact that the procurement process would be run in conjunction with the decision-making process. So that's currently underway following approval from the leader. But we aren't obviously as yet in a position to award any contracts until after the input from scrutiny and the executive councillor's decision, which is set down for the period from the 6th to the 9th of December. In terms of the benefits that we see from this, the active recovery bed service is envisaged to support timely hospital discharges and ideally reduce readmissions, because that's another aspect of the hospital usage that we have to consider, is where people are discharged from hospital, perhaps to the not optimum care provision, if they have to go home and they find that they aren't able to function as well as might be desired at home, and therefore they end up back in hospital, which increases the pressure on the hospital system. So the idea is that by having these dedicated, I think intensive care, it's fair to say, not in the acute hospital sense obviously, but in the reablement sense, intensive reablement provision in these beds is designed to help reduce the likelihood of them requiring future readmission to hospital, certainly on the same issues. It offers as a new provision, it offers an alternative care option for residents instead of them remaining in hospital when they are, as Tracy said a moment ago, medically optimised for discharge, but generally they would require a higher level of care than if they were going straight home, so they don't end up leaving the hospital at that time. It also supports the wider home first culture that the health and social care offer in Lincolnshire endeavours to promote, and that will enhance the patient outflow, and as I say, should reduce needs for residents to go into acute hospitals. It's also very much working in partnership and support with the NHS, and We also see it as benefiting NHS staff in the community, working with residents, because when they go out to active recovery beds, on the nature of these active recovery beds being procured with a proportionately high number of beds per establishment, and that's part of the contract provision, then NHS staff who do attend these individuals, they will be able to see a number of them within one visit, in one location, rather than having to travel around the county to lots of different potential locations. It should enable them to structure their visits more advantageously, shall we say. You want to come back on that, Tracy?
So they're the benefits. But if we look at the risks and dependencies, I think there are always some, but we've got winter pressures anticipated within the health and social care sector, which obviously Glenn spoke about during his presentation, and also as well as what's just been outlined. The hospital delayed discharges, this will reduce the number of discharges because we won't have people within an acute setting that it isn't in their best interest to remain in acute setting because they don't need consultant-led care. So we'll be able to discharge people from hospital quicker, which will obviously reduce the dependency that service users and customers acquire when they're in hospital. The hope is that it will also reduce the hospital admissions and readmissions because people will have a period of recovery and reablement before going home, so they'll be fully reached their level of independence that they desire to reach, but also as well it would provide them additional support. The risk is that we won't be able to get a provider that would want to provide this, but obviously that's a bridge that we need to cross. The fact that we've gone county-wide, I think I'm hopeful that we will get some in the East, West and South, which will give our customers much more choice and autonomy than what they have now, because they'll be more likely that there'll be a setting that's nearer to their own home, following on from the home first principles that we just spoke about. The time that a customer spends in the bed will be limited to a 4-week period, because it's important that because the beds are only available for a short time, that everyone has the same opportunity to have this high level of intense active recovery on hospital discharge. But also the advantages are it will place less pressure on our prime providers, because people going home from the active recovery beds will require a lesser package of care than what they would ordinarily if they was going home straight from hospital. We work very closely, obviously, with the local acute hospital discharge teams, and we recently developed a transfer of care team, which is a multi-agency health and social care hub where all referrals now are discussed. So we will be sure then that appropriate people access these beds, and it is not used in periods where the acute trusts are under extreme pressure. It's just get people out. We need to ensure that the right people access these beds at the right time for the right purpose. So working with residential care homes and the home care and reablement service, it will enable residents to move between an active recovery bed into their own home. But these beds will also be, we spoke earlier with regards to admission avoidance. So people will also be able to step up into these beds from the community. So maybe, for example, they've had a non-accidental injury when they have a fall. Quite often we know that people are conveyed to hospital when that really isn't the best place for them to go. So it may be that for a short period of time they need some intensive reablement support to get them back on their feet, rebuild their confidence. They will also access these beds to avoid unnecessary hospital admission. So we've already said that we're looking for a block within a care home. So we've gone out to tender for people that can provide a minimum of 10 beds within one unit. And that's really important, I think, because the importance is that the care staff have that reabling culture. So they do with people and not do for. We know often in care homes it's easier to will somebody to the toilet or to the dining room. But the culture here will be that they will walk where they need to walk and to maintain their level of independence. There will be performance metrics and key performance indicators. I'm keen for one of those that We have like our reablement services that they will reable a percentage of people that access the beds to require no ongoing services and a discharged home, which I think would be great for the customers and the people of Lincolnshire to maintain that level of independence. The contract is intended to start on the 12th of December and the contract will end on the 31st of March 2023. The funding is in place, as I said, by Health, and I keep them regularly updated on system strategic calls with regards to the development of them. Shall I hand back to you for procurement implications?
Yes, I was just
I think we can actually perhaps bring the councillors in and actually address any questions then accordingly. I will just remind members that this is an executive decision and that if there's any further comments from the two recommendations that we want to put forward to the executive, we will summarise at the end of this for Simon to acknowledge so that we can put it forward. So first off, I've got Karen, Tracy, then Rob.
Thanks, Chair. I absolutely think this is a great report, completely support reablement beds. And as Tracy said earlier, the policy is great. What I don't understand is, we've always had reablement beds. Always, for years and years. I've been a nurse for 20 years. We've always had reablement facilities, surely. And my question, you said that it's care-led, and I get that, but what specifically is different in practice about these beds to what we've had previously? I don't understand what the difference is. And I just wanted to make the comment about block beds. I understand all the reasons for it, but my only concern, if it's going to be a minimum of 10 and you've got 60 in total, that's going to focus it in small areas, small places. And if you're somebody who lives, and forgive the expression, in the sticks, in the middle of nowhere, somebody could have to travel a really long way to get to see the person who's in one of those beds after they've been in hospital for quite a long time as well. And I would question if the block beds in practice is possibly the best thing for the patient. It might be best for all the therapists to get to it, but I'm not sure that it's best for the patients who live sort of quite some distance away from them. But they're the 2 points that I'd raise. Thank you.
Okay, the block beds that we currently have at the moment are very small number of block beds that Lincolnshire County Council actually have, and they're dotted all around the county in different homes, and we will still have them, they will still be there. But the other beds that are funded in a block are the transitional care beds, which are community health services beds, and they are therapy-led, whereas these, as I said, are going to be very much care-led. We appreciate, and we did discuss about having maybe lesser beds in more homes, but for us it's important that the care homes have the reabling culture, and that's much more difficult to roll out on smaller bases rather than it is on a bigger environment. So adult care staff can be much more involved on longer periods of time as well, to do goal setting that with customers, see where they want to go, what they want to do. We always realise there's an element of choice, and obviously that's always a big challenge because people don't have a choice of what hospital they go to, and this is very much of their ongoing recovery. But of course we always consider people's choice, and if they don't want to have an active recovery bed, it's not something that it's not something that we're being forced upon people. Of course there's choices, and we look at the options with individual customers and their families.
Can I just come back there? Because it's the reablement aspect I'm a bit puzzled about. Because surely we already focus on reablement, and that is about, it's not just about therapy, it is about the social stuff as well. What's different about these? Is it just that they're extra? I don't understand what's different about these to what we've already got.
Okay, the reablement offer we have at the moment is community-based, so it's in people's own homes. So the reablement service in the active recovery beds will provide more intense support. Often people may need additional support at night time initially when they come home to enable them to be independent over a 24-hour period, whereas reablement just provides support in people's homes.
Okay, good explanation, thank you. I'm going to bring Rob actually in because I'm conscious Rob's got to leave quite quickly or soon, so if you don't mind, Tracy. Rob?
That's very kind of you, Mr. Chairman. I have got a bit of time left yet. the thing that struck me from this was some of the phrases that we use that seem to encapsulate what it's about. Active recovery rather than passive recovery, and also doing or working with people, not doing things to them. And I think that's so important these days. And I can actually, it came to mind as this was being discussed, of an elderly couple I know who would very much like to get home but will need support to do so, and this is the sort of thing that would help them. So from my point of view, there's a reality there, and I think it's a win-win situation. And obviously there are the other benefits, as you've outlined, such as reducing readmission rates and so on and so forth. So I think overall it's an excellent package, and I'd wholeheartedly support it. Thanks, Chairman.
Okay. Tracy then.
Thank you. Again, very much supportive of it. I think it's a really sensible price that's been offered actually for the beds, to be fair. So I don't think, I would like to think that there wouldn't be the challenge with the uptake, because obviously it's a very different price than the money offered for the other care ones. I would wonder what would happen to people who's in these beds come the 31st of March. Who's going to pay for them? Or is it going to be timed for things to be ending? Because obviously that's when the contract will run out. I actually very much support Karen's view in regards to 10 as a block, considering we were only doing 60. I think 10 in one home is too many, because I don't think it's going to spread out much considering the size of Lincolnshire. And if one of their motivations is 4F, that the NHS staff will be able to structure their visits, in reality, will those NHS visits actually happen? Because I know lots of care homes, when they do have nursing staff and things like that there, they actually struggle to get the GPs or those visits in. So if that is one of our reasons for kind of making it 10 as a minimum, then personally I would still ask that is reconsidered, to be perfectly honest. And I think you said that there's a 4-week limit. Again, is that rigid, or is it actually person kind of led on there and a bit of flexibility? Thank you.
Thank you, quite a bit in there. With regards to the health support, the ICB are also going to be commissioning additional GP cover to support, because when people are discharged from hospital into any care environment, if it's not in the area where they live, they have to temporarily register with a different GP, which can often be a challenge. But there's going to be an agreement in place that GPs will be allocated people that are in these beds on a temporary basis, so that they still receive home visits to the care home, but they also receive telephone consultations the same as they would from their own GP. So the ICB are really supporting that, and they'll be funding that part as well. Forgive me, I can't remember what other bits you said, sorry.
What happens to them after the 31st of March? Who's paying the bill?
Okay, we have experience of managing beds that end on a date. We had the designated settings during COVID, and we planned it so the last 4 weeks of the contract, we monitored very closely who went in, what their journey was going to be like, but ultimately you know, there may be 1 or 2 people there which I wouldn't want to move if that's right at the end of their journey, so we would look at funding the very short period of time to enable them to finish their journey. So I wouldn't want that to be a barrier to people maintaining their independence.
And then was the 4 weeks rigid?
The 4 weeks, no, we put 4 weeks because obviously you need to have a time period. Some people might just be there 4 days, some people might be there 4 weeks and 6 days. Because if someone is on there 4 weeks, but we think with another few more days, they wouldn't need that part of care, we would of course facilitate them remaining in them beds.
Local discretion, I suppose,
yes,
is the answer. Okay, I've got Marianne.
Might want to ask the officer to answer that one query, because I was going to ask that as well. Did you want to come in there? No.
Sorry?
Okay. Sorry, I'll just go. Thank you very much. It is good, and I really, really like the reablement homes that we used to have. And I fought very hard to keep them unsuccessfully. But I did investigate very closely what was going on in there. I did make a number of visits. I talked to all sorts of people involved, and indeed, and obviously also looked at the statistics of performance which came out, and they were very impressive, very successful. So anything that does in some way bring that to our residents, for me, is a huge plus. I hope that we might be able to extend the contract if the timing's right, if the funding could be arranged. My question is, it does seem quite short notice if it's got to start on the 12th of December and it's only going to the next executive. So just uncertain about how that's going to be. Presumably you've got most things in place ready and it's just press button go. But I can see that's quite a short period to get moving on. And the other thought is about the 4 weeks, because it used to be, I think, did it not used to be 2 weeks or something? I forget, it did used to be fine. We didn't have any problems with the period of time that we used to have. And so if this is similar, it worked really well in that people were significantly improved in that time. My only concern might be that if the hospital knows that they're going into one of the system, they might let them out even earlier. I know they do come out of hospital with things that needs, hopefully not. I've got a nurse shaking her head, so hopefully that doesn't happen. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Glenn, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. So just to remind members, the funding for this, subject to Health and Wellbeing Board ratification next Wednesday, will come from the NHS's allocation of the discharge fund for this winter. It is time limited because that's the stipulation from government, and the expectation is that it will build additional capacity until the 31st of March. That's inescapable. All systems are having to do this at pace. The evaluation that follows, though, is perhaps of interest to members, because towards the end of the financial year, we will look at those schemes that have been invested in to see what the impact was and whether there's any tweaks or adjustments, and indeed any possibility of onward funding, which I think is one of Councillor Overton's points. What we don't yet know from the Secretary of State is whether the allocation for the discharge fund might go beyond the 31st of March. There is some suggestion that it could, but in large measure it depends upon whether the country gets through the winter without too many acute care crises, particularly those that are generated because of discharge delays. So there's a lot of interest in whether this works, but it is in essence extra capacity to facilitate discharge around the acutes, driven on a very prescriptive template by government. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to agree with what one of my fellow councillors has said and disagree with two of the others. The one I'm going to agree with is Marianne, because I think the old convalescent homes are much missed and fondly remembered. And this does strike me as a step on the way to a convalescent home. So I think it's a good thing. The two councillors I will disagree with slightly are the two that said about them being local and 10 beds. I don't agree with that. I agree with the proposal, actually. I think it is important to have expertise concentrated in one place. And I completely agree with you about the staff helping people rather to do it themselves. And I think that's more likely to happen if they can do more of that during the day. So I think that's a really good thing. But I, for one, would be very pleased to see convalescent homes come back. I think they are much missed, and they were a real good thing for people to enable people to eventually go home. So I think this is great. Thank you.
Yes, I don't disagree with some of your comments. At the end of the day, the priority is to get the person back at home and mended. And actually, we can't always just say, just because you happen to live in that area, we have all the facilities there. So I've got Mike and then Mark. Are you waving your pen to speak? Yep. So Mike and Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. On the discharge angle out of the hospital into these beds, who's going to be selecting the patients? Because it would appear in my sort of logic that you try to exit as many people on a lower need level so you can get the beds out of the people out of the beds in the hospital, and then they have, as you were mentioning, 4 days or 5 days in a bed before then going home. As it were, speed being the essence, as opposed to somebody regularly being caught for 4 or 5 weeks having been discharged out of the hospital. Thank you.
The beds will be managed by adult care, and ultimately we make the decision about the appropriateness of people that go in them. It will be focused around people that are pathway 1 discharge. Within the acute hospitals, we've got 4 pathways. So pathway 0 is for people that can return to their own home without any support at all. Pathway 1 is for people that would be returning home with either bereavement or home care support. So that's the people the active recovery beds would cover. Pathway 2 is a health pathway, so it's transitional care or community hospitals. And pathway 3 is residential. Sometimes in hospital where a therapy staff might say, oh, this person needs a long-term care placement. So, but the person really, really wants to go home. So for a short period, we would look at them accessing an active recovery bed as well to have some more intense support with a view to reducing their level of care and getting them home as well. So, but they would be managed by adult care so that people aren't discharged, so we don't use it as a discharge place for hospitals for people that shouldn't be there.
Thank you for that reassurance.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the report, which I found very, very interesting. And actually, yes, I would take the point that Andrew made. I mean, when I was growing up, if you were in hospital for any length of time, and then you needed some help before you went home, you went to a convalescent hospital or for a while. The only slight concern I've got, and it is identified as one of the risks on paragraph 5.1, is the risk that says residential care market unable to provide the service. And, we're wanting to procure 10 beds per service. I'm just slightly concerned around the capacity, and would it be possible to identify enough residential care homes that could provide 10 beds from a capacity point of view? Because obviously if they are providing 10 beds for reablement, that's 10 other people they won't have in their care home. And I'm just wondering about capacity issues on that. And also from a staffing point of view, because I'm guessing that as part of the time in these reablement homes, that the residents will be receiving things like OT and physio as part of getting them back home and work around mobilisation and reablement. So I'm guessing potentially that will be provided by our staff or NHS staff. But I just want a little bit of sort of assurance around that, because just to make sure that we've got all the people to do this, because I know at the moment there is a shortage of occupational therapists in Lincolnshire. So that's apart from that, it's fantastic. It's a great example of this kind of preventing people from going back into hospital. I mean, I know in the case of my mum, she spent quite a lot of time towards the end of her life in and out of movement between hospital and home and into sort of respite, and then it was just this sort of circle all the time. So anything that breaks that, but as I say, it's just those slight reassurance around the capacity and around the skill set to provide the care. Thanks.
Thank you. Glenn?
Thank you, Chair. So with respect to capacity, the next report gives a hint as to why there is capacity in the residential market. Not so much for nursing care, but certainly for residential. Lincolnshire has, over the years, consistently had capacity of about 18 to 22% in residential services, and that has actually grown as a result of the impact of COVID. So residential care capacity is there across Lincolnshire. One of the reasons for looking at clustering around 10 units is, of course, that it facilitates, well, it makes it easier for community-based support to go in so that it's not distributed too widely and therefore diluting effect. So having 3 locations across the county will help us target the available resource, whether that's occupational therapy, community nursing or social work or some other allied therapy. I'm going to say something a little bit contentious here, but I believe that there is enough OT capacity in Lincolnshire. It's poorly organised and poorly distributed. My personal view, and this is something that we're currently working on, is an integrated occupational therapy service across the PCNs, the Acute Trust, LCHS and the County Council would probably be sufficient if it was organised and structured better than it has been historically. I'm there to be proved wrong, Chair, but that is work in progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, going back to your convalescent home, I mean, my view is actually it should all be on the site of the current NHS community hospitals, because that is where all the buses and transport goes to, and everybody can connect to those because all the systems are in place. As you say, if we diverse it across the whole of the county, we'll end up with occupational therapists on the road more times than they're actually doing a visit. I think that the report is good. You could actually say, if we built something new, would we have our beds always full? And if they're not full, then actually you would end up thinking that this was actually a really good deal, actually. So it's focused, it's specific. I'd perhaps say the thing to look at to the executive would be to review it when it's concluded to actually see if it is really the most efficient way going forward. And there is a question which I think in some bits that miss in this is in effect whether it's a list or an example of some of the users that use these facilities, because it helps everybody's mind when we can relate to the style of person that often needs these services. And I think perhaps put some examples in, or the list of, I mean, we're only talking 60 beds in effect, so there is a sort of what is their needs? Why are they in here? And I think the other bit which has come up, which is really the fundamental bit, is the fact it's about specialism in reablement. And I think maybe the future perhaps is to be looking where some of these hospitals are far more geared up to specialising in reablement. Some of them are already, but often a lot of the main NHS hospitals is about in and out, where your community hospitals become more about reablement. So, but I think a review at the end would be what I'd put forward. I think, do we all agree that actually we accept and support this? Yeah. Okay, all in favour? Thank you. All, that's unanimous. Comments to the executive. Review at the end of when all the information's back. Marianne?
Thank you. I think the key point is to consider the extension, because that's quite a short contract delivered at short notice, and we'd really appreciate an extension being considered. Yeah. Thank you.
Tracy?
We do plan on doing an interim review after the first 6 weeks, and in that will be some of the service user stories and about the success of it. So obviously that will build into any future planning, and I'll be happy to share that.
Yeah. No, that would be good to sort of come back here. I think we'd all quite like that. So, yeah, and I think that's perhaps another question in the review is actually 4 months long enough? And actually, is there more that can be done with specialist reablement? Because in effect, that's what it's all about. So,
yeah, if I could just add, I think that there is a lot of talk about winter pressures, but a lot of, as we've seen in the pandemic, a lot of illnesses don't just happen in the winter. I'm a funeral celebrant, and I know that things happen all year. So, you know, at the end of the winter, it may be that we're still under pressure till the summer. So that would be obvious to extend it if we can.
Okay.
Sorry, one other point, if we're thinking about extending it, is the savings. What we found is that, we've previously found, is that if they get the right care at the right time, they're not in such a poor condition and therefore need less care in the future. So there is a knock-on saving to the service. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, all agreed on that. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you both of you. And so, Glenn, I'm conscious that you've got to soon go, so if you want to say your bit on the next item any quicker, then let me know. But we'll move on to the service level performance quarter 2. So, right, I'll just welcome David Boath, who should be on Teams. Welcome, David.
Hello.
So,
can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you for accommodating me not being able to be there in person. I have COVID, and so does my wife, so we're isolated for the rest of the week. I'm very conscious of time, so I'll assume that members have read the report. Happy to take any questions at any point. But as a bit of an overview, members hopefully have welcomed the new format of the dashboard, which is now live on Power BI on the LCC website and not on the LRO as before. The report that was presented is written in the same way, and we're still reporting by exception, but we've organised it by the different service areas. The first section of the report is just really an opportunity to go through the published national statistics for social care for 21-22, which came out at the end of October. There is an awful lot of analysis that goes behind this, but it basically summarises all of the key performance measures that all of the local authorities are judged on and will be with the new CQC regime. When we're looking at last year, it's really, really promising for Lincolnshire. We compare ourselves to England, our region, and our SIP for Family, which is the collection of local authorities which share similar demographics and socioeconomic profiles to ourselves. So generally the big Shire counties and the big other big counties like Cumbria, Norfolk, etc. So yes, when we compare ourselves to our family, we are doing really, really well. The highlight, when we look at all 23 measures in total, we're in the top half of councils for 16 of those. In particular, where we are looking at measures for improved quality of life, 7 of 9 are in the top half, and a particular three of the 4 personalisation measures around how we deliver personal budgets in the form of direct payments. We are top 10 authority, so that's really good news. Other highlights in terms of delaying and reducing need, which Councillor just mentioned there, is really, really important in saving money for future care needs. We can see that older people admitted to residential care is particularly strong, given the challenges within a rural community. We have excellent reable outcomes, which we've heard an awful lot about so far, so it's the same message. Although we do know that we need to go further in that offer rate across the county, so that we can realise those sorts of outcomes for more people in Lincolnshire. Other than that, in terms of customer feedback from adults and carers, we have good levels of satisfaction for both, and I do believe these are going to be considered for adding into the service level monitoring to kind of bolster to that more rounded view of numbers and qualitative feedback from people that use services. So generally, yeah, we're doing okay. There are some reds on there around admissions to residential care for working age adults, and also that offer rate for people that need reablement. We know about those, and those are the sorts of things that are going to be sorted out by the BCF in the coming months. I mean, Glenn described the BCF as a lever to integration. I personally would describe it as a sticking factor. without those kind of systemic reforms that we desperately need. So if we turn our attention to local service monitoring, 3 measures have been exceeded, 10 measures have been achieved, and 4 measures did not meet the target. If I kind of just whiz through these, if we start at adult frailty, we are exceeding the admissions to residential care figure, although we do acknowledge that there are some delays in recording, but we have seen a 25% reduction in admissions in the first 6 months compared to the same 6-month period last year, so that's all very positive. At the front door, there's still a really high proportion of requests that lead to no support or lower level support. That is in part down to the success of the initial conversations in able to triage those assessments through to social care teams. And we have seen a 4-fold increase in reablement referrals in the last quarter, which is really, really positive because we can get good outcomes for those people. What adult frailty haven't been able to meet is the reviews target. This is isolated to the adult frailty teams as the specialist adults service looking at learning disabilities and mental health clients. They are on a trajectory to complete all of their reviews by year end or near as damn it. There is quite a lot of activity going on in the adult frailty teams to address the reviews, lots of planning. 40 staff have actually volunteered to complete additional reviews, and we have seen some good progress in the last 6 weeks. But to be honest, the pressure is volume. An awful lot of the reviews that are completed by the adult care teams are unplanned in nature, so responding to hospital spells and changing circumstances, and this takes up an awful lot of the resource. So yeah, I think, don't quote me on this, but that in terms of the volumes of reviews actually completed, and again, there can be multiple reviews done per person throughout the year. Adult frailty teams do 3 or 4 times the volume of specialist adults combined. So that just kind of gives you an idea of what's involved. If we move on to carers, so in terms of the review measure, if you remember from Q1 scrutiny, we asked members if they wanted to align the reviews measure for carers, which was underperforming, to kind of align to the adults way of measuring it. We've done that, and what we've seen is that 92% of carers who are eligible for review in the year have actually received a review, so that's excellent performance. If we move on to some of the public health measures, it's the same sort of discussions really around alcohol treatment and smoking cessation. I'll take a view from Glenn and the chair as to whether or not we need to go through this again, because we talk about this quite a lot each time. Kind of just acknowledging that there is a national issue there, and because of the nature of the measures which look at treatment pathways over a 12-month rolling period, we're not really going to see massive shift changes in performance. You know, from 1 month to the next, it's going to take a while for that to filter through. So yeah, with 5 minutes to go, I think I will stop there and take questions, Chair, if that's okay. Can't hear anything, sorry.
So some of the usual suspects come back, like the smoking cessation, etc. Any questions? I think most of it you've given a fair response to the reasons why. It was just sort of, there's been a dramatic increase in the customer service centre. We anticipate that the questions that are coming are are they a one-off, or have we got, is there something behind the questions for the increase on the 45% in the customer service centre? Is it something that we see coming back, or is it something that there's a challenge going forward, or is it just sort of left over from sort of change of government's ideas?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure David will come in as well on this one. The general experience across the country is significant increases in people coming to adult social care for advice, information and support. And that seems to be connected with the consequence of COVID across a range of service areas. In terms of the return rate, how many people come back through the door, I think David probably will have some information on that.
You put me on the spot there, Glenn. Not to hand, but that is something that we do actually monitor because we want people to be dealt with at the point that they make contact and not keep coming back to us. That kind of suggests that they have complex needs that change, or actually they didn't get the right intervention straight off. But yeah, that 45% increase from quarter two to from quarter one, it is quite a dramatic increase. We just need to kind of keep that in mind. But it kind of just says that we need that kind of that triage function, if you like, with the initial conversations working seamlessly. And in some respects, it's a blessing in disguise that the funding reforms have been put back 2 years, because all of those people that would come forward to the local authority would need to have a full needs assessment. So that would go all the way through the triage process to the social work teams. All of them would need quite an intensive assessment completing before they can meter against the care cap. So actually, yeah, I think that is a bit of a blessing in disguise, because that would be a huge wave that we probably wouldn't be able to overcome.
Okay, thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Chair. So in context for members, I think it's important to recognise that this is data that relates to the second year of COVID. The year 22-23, this year, this financial year, I think will, in retrospect, show a level of recalibration of how public services are being impacted because of the changes in the population, driven partly by COVID, but also by changing needs. So I think it'll probably be this time next year where we're able to look back on 22-23 as the new normal. At the moment, we don't know what that looks like, but the indications are that number of people coming through the door, both in health and care, have higher acuity. They will therefore come back more often because of the dynamic nature of their conditions. And the likelihood is that more people will need information and advice and support. To be fair, I don't think that's got so much to do with the government changing in terms of leadership.
The final bit of my question would then be, is our website give enough and simplified enough to actually answer people's, in effect, questions or signposting or advice and everything else to stop, in effect, the progression to a customer service centre?
Thank you, Chair. So the information and advice offer from the Council has been improving over time. Connect to Support, a key delivery vehicle for that, has increasing usage patterns and also includes a number of partner agencies' information as well. So people should get a more rounded response from that site. I think, though, it can only be seen in context with other facilities like the initial conversations that David has mentioned, where people are given an opportunity without the need to go through a full-blown assessment for a much quicker response, having identified what it is that they are concerned about. And that's making a singular difference to our ability to manage demand.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
And do we have a mechanism that, in effect, can gauge customer experience? Because in some sense, it's actually, often with these things, it's how does the customer actually react to the information we put up there against progression?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is part of the report, and David might want to touch on this as well. But one of the recommendations I'm making to Executive is to include 2 customer experience survey reports, one for people using adult social care and one for carers, that I think would deliver on that, in the sense that it's a fairly large scale customer experience survey that, if you look through the corporate plan, there aren't many of.
Yeah. So, do you want to come in, Andrew?
I was just going to say, because you mentioned the customer service centre, I have asked if perhaps a trip could be organised. It's not very far away, I know, but a visit, so we can actually see and talk to the people there and see for ourselves the sort of things that are happening, and, you know, and the sort of inquiries they're getting. Because I would really like to do that, because it's often the thing that I'm asked about, or where do we go, what do we do, or I've spoken to them, I'd like to see it for myself and talk to the staff. So I have asked if that could perhaps be arranged at some point. Thank you.
And the plan is that we'll try and arrange it to follow on from one of our committee meetings sort of early next year, so that we can sort of just have lunch and then go and tour it for those that want to go and have a look around it and hear what it is. Mike?
Yeah, you just touched on a point there that I sort of dwelled on before. Are we, or do we regularly review the pressures that our customer care people are under in providing this information? I think you mentioned before, Glenn, that there is an assessment, but I just wonder if you could reiterate on that. Thank you.
And when are those customer surveys sort of completed or coming back or summarised?
Thank you, Chair. I will happily come back to scrutiny with a report on, shall we say, the customer service centre experience and the activity undertaken there. It's a corporate function that sits within the centre of the County Council, and we have recently been in discussion with Serco about the scale of the resources available. In one particular case, it was around carers and carer assessments and backlogs. That's been addressed, so that there are no longer any backlogs in carer assessments. So we do look at it on a fairly regular basis, and particularly looking at the pinch points. Yeah. It isn't always just down to the customer service centre, though. Again, new business models can apply, and sometimes we're able to find a solution that doesn't require the customer service centre to, as it were, do more.
Yeah. Okay. All okay with that? So we'll sort of, I think some of that, best thing is we'll sort of let yourself and Simon sort of schedule the sort of, so that in effect the customer reports come back, the surveys come back, and then we perhaps go to the actual call centre and have a look at it, so it all ties into one agenda item potentially. But we'll let you work up that going forward. But it certainly won't be January or February, because we're fairly well loaded up. And on that note, thank you, David and Glenn, for that. And we'll go to Simon for the work programme.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. If I could just draw the committee's attention to pages 78 and 79. A couple of changes to the list. The DeWint Court update is moving from June next year into January, so that's being brought forward. And the acute hospital's admission to discharge care pathway is dropping back from January to February, so that there's more of a so it can take more account of the winter rather than in January. But those are the two main changes. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Marianne?
Thank you. I wonder if I could ask, I don't know if it's on the work programme, but we had a presentation from Derek as the Director of, Derek Ward, the Director of Public Health, and he pointed out that they've been doing a lot of work into combining the public health service across Greater Lincolnshire, and he said he was going to need a decision on that in November because it was costing quite a lot of resources, and either they were going ahead or they weren't. And I don't know if there's been any feedback on that, or whether we can ask for feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. I know he's concluding and bringing a lot of the information forward. but in effect, he's actually on our agenda in January, at the beginning of January, about January the 11th, is it, or whenever it is? And of course, he's bringing back the public health report, his annual report. So I think that'll be an ideal time to question him at that point.
Just to say, Chairman, on that report, I understand that that annual report is an annual report for all of Greater Lincolnshire. All Greater Lincolnshire, yeah.
Brilliant.
He did say November was a crunch point for him. November was a crunch point. So can we get an answer after the meeting, perhaps? Thank you.
Okay. Somewhat. Okay. Okay, all right. Well, thank you all for coming, and have a safe trip home. Thank you.